Welcome and thank you for stopping by Sheila's Audiobooks, and I am Sheila. This recording is coming from South Texas. All stories on this recording are in the public domain per United States copyright law. These stories were first published around April 1910. They are about Lord Lister called John C. Raffles, the most brilliant among all thieves. He is the terror of usurers and moneylenders, robs them of their possessions by his wiles, protecting beleaguered innocence and supporting the needy. Man of honor in all respects. He persuaded that many abuses, protected by law, continue to proliferate with impunity. Every effort is made to apprehend Lord Lister, called John C. Raffles, the most brilliant of thieves. Reward, £1,000 sterling. Lord Lister among the dumps of Messina. By Kurt Machulik. Chapter 1. A Friend in Accident. Anyone who had seen the two men, facing each other in Lord Lister's cozy study, would certainly have mistaken them for twins. They had almost the same tall, slender figure, and not only did their features resemble each other, but so did the hair and moustache. Yet the one was an English lord, the other a Sicilian marquis from Messina, the faithful friend of the former. A big difference, however, lay in their eyes. The Englishman's had an expression of pride, zest for life, and strength, while the countenance of the aristocratic southern Italian spoke of sad dejection. "Reassure yourself, my dear Marquis Finori," said Lord Lister, shaking the hand of the tried friend. "Sit down and tell me more of the sudden death of your esteemed father. Who would have thought that, when, scarcely a year ago, he ascended Mount Etna with such vigor and health? I can hardly believe in his death." The young Marquis Finori had sat down and pressed his batiste handkerchief to his eyes. He suppressed a loud sob with difficulty. "Ah, Lister, it seems almost impossible to me. The terrible thing, however, is that I myself know nothing more about the accident than that, according to a letter from the authorities of Messina, my good father perished with his sailing yacht on the stormy sea. His belongings, his coat, other clothes and cap were found, and the battered yacht was thrown on the beach at Catania." "What? And his body has not been found?" Lord Lister asked in intense attention. "Not yet." "Isn't that terrible? And besides, think, Lister, by order of the Sicilian bank I was informed by the loyal Avasi that the money, amounting to £1 million, which had been deposited there, was withdrawn on a check from my father shortly before the accident. As a result, the bank is no longer able to pay me my monthly bills. Now, shortly before the terrible disaster, I have received a letter, written in my father's hand, directing me to a Sicilian fortune-teller here in London. Furthermore, that interests me very much," exclaimed Lister, lighting a cigarette and offering the Marquis the case, which he refused. "Yes, knowing my father's liberality, such a wish surprised me exceedingly. And have you been there already, Marquis?" "Not yet, dear friend." "So much the better. But go on." "Moreover, in that letter my father requested me to return as soon as possible, as he had important family matters to discuss with me. Furthermore, the bill of 5,000 lire mentioned therein has meanwhile arrived. So I shall return to my native country in a few days, but as a very different man. How terrible is all this! This terrible misfortune, which has struck me like a bolt of lightning from the clear sky, almost robs my mind. Everything is so improbable, and yet there is no doubt about it. Give me advice, help me, Lister. Thou art the only friend who enjoys my full confidence. What should I do? How am I to solve the terrible riddle?" The Marquis wrung his hands as two great tears rolled down his pale cheeks. Lord Lister blew blue clouds from his cigarette and thought. Then he looked at his friend, who was so deeply grieved, with pity, and said, "All I can do, dear Marquis, I will do, if only out of respect for your noble father. But I don't understand everything yet. In this mysterious matter there are above all 2 points which remain to be elucidated. First, the strange desire of such a sensible old man as for which I have come to know your father, the desire to inquire of a fortune-teller for the future, and second, the common disappearance of, forgive the expression, your father and the wealth in the bank." It may also be possible that your father's desire to know the future had its origin in a presentiment the old gentleman had of the approaching misfortune. May I see the letter? The Marquis had calmed down. Already the consciousness, to have a friend by his side had comforted him. He took the letter from his pocket and handed it to Lister. The young lord read it carefully. For a moment his eyes sparkled. "What a beautiful, regular handwriting your father had," he said. "Yes, if he did it at his leisure, as was evidently the case with this letter. Otherwise he would usually write faster and more sloppily, my good father." Lister nodded meaningfully. "It is a beautiful, well-written letter," he noted. "I should like to memorize its contents accurately." "Oh right, that's what it says about the fortune-teller. Such a Sicilian. Would you perhaps confide the letter to me for a little while longer?" "As long as you like, dear friend. I know this last letter of my dear father verbatim by heart." Lister held the letter with him. "Do not hide your thoughts from me, dear lord," pleaded the Sicilian, in a lively tone. He noticed very well that the young lord thought his own mind about the letter. "Speak frankly with me. Tell me your conclusions and tell me what to do." "My dear Finori," replied the lord, "I will not precipitate your hopes or fears. I don't know enough yet. But I beg you to trust me completely, even if I keep my suspicions to myself. Did your father, as is the case in almost all Italian towns and in most Italian noble families, had enemies?" The Marquis raised his hand in alarm. "For God's sake, Lister. You don't mean to say that my dear father has fallen victim to a murderer?" "Oh, in that case. I don't know anything yet, Finori. Keep calm. I will do my best to find out everything. Promise me not to excite you, but to answer me calmly and calmly to the questions I shall have to put to you." "You are right, Lister. But as far as I know, my father had no enemy in his private life, and I never heard of family quarrels either. He was widely regarded for his honest, frank, and benevolent character." "The more difficult the matter becomes," replied Lister. "But I have resolved to brighten it up and shed light on this mysterious darkness, if it pleases you." "I wish nothing more fervently, my dear fellow." "Oh, how can I thank you?" "By doing as I will advise you." "Please, Lister. You take a stone from my heart, if you will handle my case. I can see all too well how much this hard blow has hit me. I myself would not be able to find my way in this chaos of thoughts and possibilities." Lister nodded and thoughtfully lit another cigarette. "If you promise me to follow my directions, even if you don't immediately see its effectiveness, I will make your business my own. As I have no other urgent occupations at the moment, I will most probably accompany you to Messina." The Marquis jumped up electrified. His eyes shone, and for the first time, an expression of joy passed over his aristocratic, but melancholy features. "Oh, my dear friend," he cried with great delight, reaching out his hands to Lister, "if you would do that for me, I should be eternally grateful to you. I didn't dare ask you that, but it was on my heart. Now I see my case not so desperately as hitherto. Thou, who can do all thou wilt, shalt succeed even now." Lister smiled kindly and shook hands with the excited Italian. "Not too soon, Finori, who goes slowly, goes healthy," says an Italian proverb. "Thou overestimated, with thy innate kindness, my feeble powers. I will try. Whether I will be successful, however, is another matter." Thank you, Lister," cried the Marquis with enthusiasm. "I have been rescued and now completely calm. Everything will be all right, if you take the matter in hand. I gladly submit blindly to all your wishes and arrangements." "Then listen to my first wish for the sake of the cause." "Speak, Lister, speak. Your wish is my command." Lister thought for a few moments. He blew a cloud of smoke before him and suddenly spoke. "First of all, I forbid you to visit the Sicilian fortune-teller." Finori looked up in surprise. "What? Though it is my father's last wish before the accident?" "Nevertheless, Marquis," Lister replied with a smile. "For the rest, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion yet, that this strange desire really was your father's wish. I am so free to doubt that, in which I am reinforced by the neat writing of the letter. You must not go there, dear friend." "But Lister, not to follow my father's wish? Do you doubt the authenticity of the letter?" "But it is certainly his handwriting, only very neatly written." It is precisely this point that needs to be examined very carefully. But then I should visit that fortune teller. Finori protested. That statement is correct. Lister replied in agreement. And yet, must you not make that visit? If the letter is false, then here we have the first trace, the first hint of a crime. I don't understand you, Lister. If so, and you may be right, I don't understand why you want to prevent me from following the trail. Just then it is my sacred duty to seek out the fortune teller. You cannot prevent me from doing this. Lord Lister laughed. I thought you would blindly obey all my wishes, Marquis. He spoke ironically. Certainly, Lister, I want that too. After all, I am so grateful to you for the help promised to me, but in this case, you must see for yourself. I have no other choice. I must look up the somnambulist. We must try to follow that track. Who's to say that won't happen? Asked the Lord in a calm tone. If you don't go, that doesn't mean that no one else will go in your place. For if you don't mind, I'll visit her myself. Finori hit his forehead with his hand. That I hadn't thought of that before. Yes, as yourself, that's another thing. But Lister, dear friend, do you hide nothing from me? Wouldn't there be danger associated with that visit? I would never forgive myself if any harm happened to you. Come, what are you thinking, Marquis? Here in London? No, don't be afraid. I only fear that you would handle the matter less calmly than I do. That's all. My nerves allow me to take it all in carefully and research as much as possible, so that we can start from this point. Do you not agree with me? You are right, Lister. The matter cannot be better investigated than by your personal involvement. Oh, I am eternally grateful to you. Beautiful. So we agree, said Lister, smiling, as he called. When Frederick, the Lord's old valet, appeared, Lister said to Finori, follow Frederick into my dressing room and let him give you one of my artist's costumes there, consisting of velvet tube, grey trousers, embroidered waistcoat and flambard. Change your clothes and send me your own clothes, which I need for the visit in question. Finori looked puzzled for a moment, but then followed the valet with zeal to the dressing room. Lister walked up and down the room, lighting another cigarette. After a few strong pulls he rang twice. Then he took the letter from his coat and unfolded it. Right, number 40 Beach, East London. A dangerous neighborhood. He was just taking a pair of ornate, very finely crafted 7-barrel revolvers from a drawer of his desk when his friend and secretary, Charlie Brand, came in. At his questioning look, Lister replied with a smile. Handful of labor, Charlie. Put your work down for a while, but clean everything up neatly. Thank heaven! Cried Charlie with genuine joy. This exclamation shows no great enthusiasm for your work. But you are forgiven this time. You might prefer a trip to Italy than your secretariat, wouldn't you? I should like to know who would answer no. Thank you for your sincerity, my dear Charlie, your wish will come true. Charlie looked at him open-mouthed. Seriously? He asked in surprise. Naturally. It won't exactly be a pleasure trip this season, but it's serious. Listen. It is wonderful that Shaw, the Chicago billionaire, has put his steam yacht at our disposal. The yacht must be ready by tomorrow evening, at the most the day after tomorrow morning, for a voyage to the Mediterranean. Warn the crew, speak to the old sailor, Captain Wheeler, get plenty of provisions and whatever else is needed, and don't let a moment be wasted. Wheeler must spare nothing for the equipment and must first carefully examine the whole yacht. Get the necessary passes for both of us and also for Marquis Finori. Get to work, my boy. We are going to the blue Mediterranean, although it may also have a slightly different color in December of the year of our Lord 1908. Charlie was beside herself with joy. He jumped with both feet in the air and rushed out of the room like a whirlwind, presumably to throw his paperwork in a corner or to tuck it neatly away in his desk. The valet brought in the Marquis's elegant suit. No sooner was Lister ready to put them on when Finori entered the room and stood in amazement. It almost seemed to him as if he saw his doppelganger standing in front of him. Sit here in front of the mirror, Marquis. We are already alike as brothers, but a few strokes will not hinder. He took out his makeup brushes and made on his own face the resemblance between himself and the Marquis so striking that it seemed a miracle. He was already about to begin to change Finori's features into his own when he spoke hesitantly. No. We are too similar. It is not really necessary that we switch roles. It is enough that I act as Marquis Finori. If you represented Lister, you would be in danger of being recognized by that very resemblance. You speak English so excellently that you may very well pass for an American artist. He went to a cupboard in the wall and took from it a wig with profuse artist locks of brownish color and a beard to match. He decorated the Italian with this, giving him a completely different appearance. You see, Finori, that's better for you. No one will miss the brilliant American painter Mr. Cook, whom you now admire in my mirror. Recognize the aristocratic Marquis Luigi Finori. Oh, Lister! Exclaimed the pseudo-painter enthusiastically, thou art my savior, my providence. I wouldn't know what to do without you. Let us hope for the best, Finori. But tell me, can you sketch and scribble a little, so that you can remain completely in your part? The newfangled artist smiled. You can rest assured about this. That is innate to us, Italians. You wouldn't believe how much I've already wasted on paper, pencil, and paint. I have made all kinds of attempts to draw with pastel and oil paint. I have even modeled with clay. Some of my works, which my father, a very biased judge of course, considered masterpieces, must still be in our old palace in Messina. But that is wonderful, Marquis. So you sketch everything you see, good or bad, it doesn't matter. Besides, of course you take everything. I own an excellent camera. I will give it to you at once. Lister got up and went to his closet. As it had grown dark in the meantime, he turned on the electric light and went to the window, which looked out onto the large garden of the villa, to draw the curtains. At this moment a shot rang out outside. The bullet flew right past Lister's head, through the window pane, and hit the opposite wall. With lightning speed the lord, with great presence of mind, had pulled out of his pocket one of his excellent miniature revolvers. Almost at the same time, without sparing the windows, he had fired in the direction from which the shot had come. In the next instant he had opened one of the casement windows and had leapt out of the high window to pursue the assassin with his revolver in his fist. Finori was just about to follow him when Charlie flew into the room. What happened? Who shot? He asked breathlessly. Ask nothing, Mr. Fire. It was aimed at me. Lister is my savior. But we must not leave him alone with these assassins. Come on, to the park. The two young men jumped out the window like cats, while two more gunshots were fired in the park. Hasty haste is seldom good. Chapter 2. The Silicon Fortune Teller's Answer. The quarter of the English capital, which is referred to as Beach, especially in the eastern part, with the numerous docks, shipyards and warehouses built on the Thames, still today contains such infamous, dreaded slums and alleys, corners and caverns that not even the boldest officers of Scotland Yard would dare venture there. It should be all the more striking that a comparatively well-dressed man, who under his black, broad-brimmed flambard had for some reason tied a fur handkerchief around his head and ears, crept with swift strides into one of the slums of this part of the city and reached one of the most important houses that were there remained standing. In the dim light of a gas lantern, which stood some distance away, the nameplate could read with some difficulty, the world-famous fortune teller of Messina. The late visitor seemed to be familiar here, for he cared not the least bit about this interesting and far from modest announcement. He took out a key, looked around carefully, unlocked the door and crept inside. In spite of the darkness that prevailed there, the man walked silently, but with great certainty, down the hall, and then silently opened a door to the room. He entered, closed the door carefully, and slammed the bolt on it. A dim light penetrated through a doorway in one of the side walls, and as he stopped listening, he heard distinctly in the adjoining room two voices, which must have belonged to persons of different sexes. The listener lit no light, but quickly and carefully took off his boots. He then crept to the door, where he fumbled for a button. When he pressed this, part of the carvings shifted, leaving a circular opening at eye level. A ray of the bright light from the side room fell upon the man's face. His features seemed hard and cruel under the floppy hat and fur handkerchief, but as he looked at the scene in the side room his features seemed to change. There he is cursed. He muttered grimly to himself. He really dared. So much the better. So the hour of vengeance has come. The room into which the mysterious listener looked was the fantastically and uninvitingly furnished private room in which the Sicilian fortune-teller spoke her wisdom to her often highly placed visitors and visitors who wanted a glimpse into the future. The walls were hung with black curtains, with numerous white skulls and bones, snakes and salamanders and mysterious figures. Above the fortune-teller's elevated seat hung a map of the planets, while to the right and left of her lay two actual skulls on bulky follicles. The fortune-teller, dressed in black and wearing a black silk half-mask, had just shuffled the cards again and was now beginning to explain them. Before her, at a distance and only visible from the back of the mysterious visitor, sat a slender figure in mourning clothes, as the broad mourning ribbon on the arm and the cylinder standing on a table showed. "It's him," murmured the spy, "he whom I hate, in person. I have come at the right time to clear the last hindrances to my happiness." He looked with eyes twinkling with hatred at the two in the other room, and his right hand clutched the grip of an Italian dagger in his breast pocket. In a monotonous voice, which at first gradually took on expression, the fortune-teller began to speak as if she were seeing invisible beings, as if listening to otherworldly voices. "Believe the fortune-teller, young man. I see before me the terrible misfortune that the recent past has brought you. But be comforted, it will be negated by an unspeakable happiness in the future." A scornful grin distorted the inhuman features of the listener at these fortune-teller's predictions. She continued, "Thou shalt undertake a far journey. I hear them rushing, the waves of the infinite sea. I hear the storm howling and hear loud cries for help and thundering surf. But as once the divine Ulysses was rescued from the waves of the boiling sea, so a helping fairy with black hair and deep soulful eyes appears to you on the far shore in peril. Be assured, inquisitive young man, that fate favors you. It will make up for the hard blow with which it has struck you. Rich, beloved, happy and famous you will live on the fair island to old age." The fortune-teller was silent, lost in her musings. The young man in mourning clothes stood up. "Thank you, madam. It was very interesting, I must confess. Here are £5. He threw the gold pieces on the spread-out cards with an indifferent gesture. "I should triple that sum, if you could give me more details of the journey which you foretold me, or something nearer as to the misfortune that has cast me down." The fortune-teller was about to answer in the negative when suddenly, without her own artful warning, a glittering revolver was pointed at her forehead. "You know so much, learned fortune-teller. Whoever said A must also say B. Speak or die. Is Marquis Finori dead, or what happened to him? Confess, woman, you have betrayed yourself." The fortune-teller sprang up in terror, and involuntarily glanced helplessly toward the door of the adjoining room behind her adversary's back. Seeing that the round peephole had been opened, she breathed again, relieved, and a gleam of joy appeared in her eyes. But the visitor turned with lightning speed, and in the next instant a shot rang out, aimed at the circular opening. "Cesare, Caesar!" screamed the woman. The door had already been thrown open. The bullet missed its target and the suspected spy burst into the room with the dagger raised, furious. But the lord in sackcloth had seen him coming. He deftly swerved from the treacherous stab of the stab and struck the attacker with the metal barrel of his revolver in true English boxer fashion, so that he fell backwards and, moaning, laid his hand on his temple where the weapon had struck him. The young man had now risen so that he could keep an eye on both the fortune-teller and the man who was called Cesare, whose headscarf first struck him. Also in his left hand now shone a revolver, aimed at his attacker. "Hands up, both of you. Do not move or I will shoot you like mangy dogs," cried the stranger in a loud voice. "May I now perhaps repeat my question of a moment, Signora?" he added, both revolvers ready to fire. "Cesare, come here. On the stage," cried the woman in terror. Come, it's time." Before the young man understood what these words meant, the man in the cloth had jumped with a deft swing at the woman on the dais, and the revolver shot hit the wall. Suddenly there was a strange creaking, like chains and wheels. The gentleman in sackcloth now also wanted to jump on the platform, but he saw how it turned around and disappeared into an opening in the wall with the table, cards and gold pieces and the two persons. To the scorn of the fortune-teller, Cesare cried with unmerciful cruelty, "Go to hell, Luigi Finori, you fool, and greet your father and all your noble family there." "See you again, Signor Cesare," replied the young man with a furious look, putting his revolvers in his pockets. Soon, however, it would become clear to him what the criminal had meant, for the next moment he felt the wooden floor shake beneath his feet. Drums. If I was in Italy I would think of an earthquake. But here in our solid Albion. But the unsteady feeling got worse. Suddenly the floor sagged on both sides. A fissure opened in the middle, and before the young man had found a place to hold on to, the floor opened as if in two flaps, and the soothsayer's visitor plunged into the abyss helplessly. During the fall it occurred to him with lightning speed that the journey, though perhaps in a cellar, could not be great, as the fortune-teller lived in a house on the ground floor. Before he thought of it, he had reached the bottom, and, with a flop he plunged into the water. "Screw, for the devil!" he exclaimed. "That's nice and fresh. A bath in December is not one of the things I particularly like." The Thames water was quite cold. In this confined space the man, who was so ruthlessly threatened with death, could only with difficulty save himself from destruction. But how long could he do it? Already his limbs became stiff from the icy water, and he looked desperately for an exit. There he heard voices overhead, and when he looked up he saw two devilish faces. "He's still above water. Let him squirm just a little, Madre mia, in this nice bath." The young man was almost stiff, but the anger in him gave him new strength. He felt in his pocket to see if the revolver was still usable. One shot failed, but the next one cracked and the bullet flew past the heads in the doorway. "Cursed dog of a marquis!" shouted the criminal in unbridled rage, "do you bite while you die?" At these words he too took out a revolver and shot 3 times in succession toward the spot where the young man's dark face appeared above. At the same instant, however, the head was gone, and only the water was visible, sloshing with a monotonous sound against the walls of the house. A ray of joy appeared in the eyes of the fortune-teller and her wicked son. "The obstacle to our happiness has been cleared, mother. The Marquis' millions are now ours." "Oh, what good fortune, my son, for you two, who are so handsome. I hope he sails to the devil like his proud father." "But wouldn't one discover anything, Figlinolo? The Thames will erase every trace. She's taking Luigi's corpse to the North Sea. But we, mother, will soon leave this gloomy land of fog, and in our sunny homeland no one will think of accusing us of the disappearance of Luigi." "Oh, now I am perfectly happy," cried the woman, extending her arms. The criminal jumped for joy and embraced his mother with southern vivacity. "Soon we shall take up residence with pomp in the ancient palace of fine Nori. But it is a pity that the sea should take the corpse," said the fortune-teller thoughtfully. "What?" exclaimed her son. "Do you still pity our mortal enemy?" "No, my son," replied the woman in a low voice, "not himself, but the fine gold pieces that disappear with him into the North Sea." Chapter 3. In the water of the Thames. The young man, nearly paralyzed in the icy river water, had scarcely seen the revolver flash in the criminal's hand before he ducked and tried to save himself with a few blows near the stone wall. This he succeeded very easily, and thus escaped the gunshots of the enraged Sicilian. Already he thought he would lose consciousness from cold and lack of air, when, with his right hand outstretched, he could no longer feel the wall, and upon closer examination the man who had been doomed by the criminals discovered a way out, a rather narrow tube which, underpassed the house, to the Thames. Several minutes of anxious exertion followed, his heart pounded, but with superhuman effort the young man managed to work his way through the narrow passage and reach the river. With true delight he breathed again in the open air, and to his considerable delight he soon found that he was a good distance from the house of the criminals. Around him, on both banks of the river, countless lights reflected in the dark water, and the lights of the anchored boats shone in different colors too. Conscious of escaping the ignominious death which the two criminals had intended him to be, the young man had scarcely noticed the cold endured. Now, however, he felt the effect of the icy water. He swam a little further, trying not to land too close to the killer's house. The Marquis, as the fortune-teller and her son had called him, seemed to a Sicilian very well acquainted with the banks of the Thames. "We already have West Dock Corner here," he muttered. "Now I can go and warm up a little in the Jolly Rower and immediately see if the old sea seal still lives there." He swam to an anchored river ship, next to which lay a small boat. He jumped with difficulty into the craft, stretched his stiff limbs, and was delighted to see that 2 oars lay in it. Without a moment's hesitation he untied the boat, hooked up the oars, and a few strokes carried him among other boats and ships to the jetty at West Dock Corner. Here he moored the craft and climbed the stairs. In the first side street he saw the light of the red lantern of the Merry Rower. The dripping young man thought it better not to go through the taproom, which was full of sailors and dockers, so he walked down a long corridor and disappeared into a side room already familiar to him. It was comfortably heated, but empty. He pressed the button of the electric bell 3 times. Soon the broad-shouldered innkeeper appeared in person. The benevolent smile on his face, however, gave way to an expression of boundless surprise, as he recognized the soaked gentleman before him. He looked at him speechless and open-mouthed. "Yes, yes, now you are amazed, dear Colwood. But me too. A December bath of at least an hour also stiffens the most limber muscles. Here, however, it is very comfortable. But still I would be immensely grateful to you if you could help me with dry clothes. And a glass of grog would taste great to me." The innkeeper finally got over his surprise. He clasped his hands together and exclaimed, "For God's sake, my lord! How miserable you are! I fell in the Thames, Colwood, that's all, and I immediately tried how far I could swim at 4 or 5 degrees. You cannot tell me that, my lord. If there isn't an interesting history behind that. I swear, dear Colwood, don't ask any more now, I'll tell you everything later. It was a cursed adventure. But now quickly clean linen and dry clothes. I'm running away already, my lord." At those words, he quickly disappeared. When the lord had drunk 2 glasses of hot grog and put on, Mr. Colwood felt reborn, and soon he was smoking a cigarette. "Is Captain Wheeler or any of his men in the tap room?" he asked the innkeeper. "No," replied the latter, "they are all to Sheerness. They cursed not a little, those old seals, that the mad American was just now in the mood for a pleasure trip. The Meteor has been puffing all afternoon." "All the better. One more thing, Colwood. Does Greenston have his steamer here?" "Greenston is in the taproom and so is his driver. The steamer will therefore be in its usual place." "Excellent. Ask him if he can take me to Mr. Shaw can bring." "To the Meteor? Do you want to go with me then?" "That goes without saying, Colwood. You do know that Mr. Shaw is my friend. But all this is secret. The best thing is that you Mr. Greenston calls out." About an hour later, a small steamer had moored right next to a beautiful silver-grey steam yacht. In amazement and curiosity, 3 sailors looked down as the rope ladder was rolled up. When the trained climber had come aboard with great dexterity, there was a hearty laughter. "Is it you, Edward, or is it your ghost?" asked Charlie cheerfully. Lord Lister, for it was he, looked at his own clothes with well-acted delight. "Am I neat or not, Charlie? But now seriously, do you have my wardrobe on board?" "Naturally. Everything all right." It was not long before the lord was again dressed in his own elegant raiment, this time attired as a sailor. The borrowed money went back in the boat, and Captain Greenston steamed up the Thames again, after Lord Lister had generously compensated him. In the same instant, thick clouds of smoke billowed from both pipes of the beautiful steam yacht, anchors were raised, Captain Wheeler took his seat on the command bridge, and the Meteor with our friends aboard took a course from Sheerness first south, then sailed past the chalk cliffs of Dover and then southwest through the Channel to the Atlantic Ocean and later through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. Barely a week later, in a cafe on the harbour of Naples, 3 strangers, speaking English, were seated around a fine bottle. It was the gentleman who had just arrived on the rich yacht of the billionaire Mr. Shaw of Chicago in person, his cousin Robert Bentinck Shaw, and an American artist, Mr. Cook from Philadelphia. Under these disguises, Lord Lister thought he could safely assume that they would remain unknown until they succeeded in discovering a trace of Marquis Luigi's missing or deceased father. This could be all the more presumed because the Marquis's greatest enemies, misled by Lord Lister, believed to have caused his father's avenger, the young Finori, an untimely grave in the waters of the Thames. After they had eaten and enjoyed the excellent wine, the Marquis rose. No one, even his best friend, would have recognized him in his artist disguise. "I have to go out for a while, Lister," he said with some embarrassment in his look and tone. "My dear Mr. Cook," replied the lord, who indeed looked like a very well-to-do American millionaire, "my name is Shaw from Chicago, don't forget that. Furthermore, it is impossible that I allow you to go out alone here in beautiful Naples, so close to your native country. We cannot know if we are not being searched from London. Besides, I still have to go to the English consul about our passes." The Marquis forgot that he was wearing a wig and scratched at the false hair. "Dear Lister, I must do it myself." "Ah, A rendezvous? No, no, but I'm waiting for a message. And can't you trust me with that? Finori blushed. If you don't want it any other way, Lee Mr. Shaw, all right. It is only necessary to collect a certified letter with agreed address from the post office in Strada de Piliero, a letter from a lady who informs me of my circumstances, perhaps even reports of my poor father. Lister offered his friend a participating hand. So it's even more dangerous than I thought. If this lady is known to your enemies as a good acquaintance of yours, I will not give a centime for your life. So give me the letters of the address. Vendetta 100. You see, then, that it is not a love story. Lister smiled. That has not yet been proven. And what would hinder that? But come on. Don't drink too much, gentlemen. These wines are stubborn as are the lazy here. I would rather suggest a driving tour through the most beautiful city in the world. How would you like to ride to Virgil's cave and monument? I may come later, otherwise we will meet again here. Charlie was eager for this plan, but Finori kindly begged to read the letter he was waiting for first, and so Lister promised to come back soon to do the rest together. Chapter 4. A failed door. Strang and the sign of the Mafia. Lord Lister, who knew Naples well from his former sojourn in that city, had gone by carriage to the English and then to the American consulate in Strada Santa Lucia. He had made his request to both gentlemen, and the American consul, on the recommendation of his English colleague, and after inspection of the papers, had without hesitation issued the 3 passes, on condition, however, that these, after the objective had been achieved or after the end of the efforts, would be returned or destroyed. Then he had ridden to the Strada Piliero post office to collect the letter for the Marquis. He had paid his coachman at the post office. The spacious post office was almost empty. Alone at a desk beside the counter for certified letters and postal paperwork stood an apparently young man, whose face was covered by the floppy brim of a grey hat. He was engrossed in reading a postcard. Seeing the fat Mr. Shaw enter, he shrugged contemptuously and resumed reading. Scarcely, however, did Mr. Shaw, with a smile, reach the officer's agreed address, Vendetta, Cento. Given up and the letter accepted from the hand of the very polite official, or a brown hand appeared in front of the counter, and before the corpulent gentleman could prevent it, this hand with the letter had disappeared. When Lord Lister turned rather bluntly, the lectern was deserted and he just saw the back of a slender male figure disappear behind the street door. But if the thief had thought low the speed of the corpulent gentleman, he would have been much mistaken, for Lord Lister, who excelled in all sports, had already won many prizes in running. After 50 paces he had already caught up with the impudent stranger, struck him against the temple with his left fist, and again took the letter from him. With a moledetto, the Italian fell, clutching his aching head with both hands. He has enough for half an hour, thought Lord Lister. What, the devil, does the fellow fall in to take off with the letter? Perhaps he thought he had a letter with money. He left the half-conscious with his headache, and, carefully tucking the letter away in his breast pocket, went on to visit his friends in the cafe and bring Finori the much-desired letter from Messina. It was warm on that Italian December day, and the inflated rubber casing that Lord Lister used to keep Mr. Introducing Shaw from Chicago did little to make him feel the heat in his brisk gait. He was just pondering whether he would not be wiser here in Italy to lay off this stage and resemble Mr. Shaw only in countenance and hair, when he felt a violent thrust in the periphery of his heart and nearly tumbled backwards. At the same time he heard the words, "Revenge of the Mafia." At the same time, however, he heard a hissing sound, which at first he could not explain, but which apparently came from his own body. But already he had regained his presence of mind. He recognized next to him the brown Italian in the grey hat, which he thought he had worn for half an hour. The fellow was apparently over the punch earlier. A sharp blow with Lister's left hand struck the man so tenderly on the forearm that the glittering dagger, which he had raised for a second thrust, fell to the asphalted pavement of the quay. In horror, however, the Italian, a man of about 30, had fallen to his knees, and he raised his arms in supplication. "Have mercy, signore," he moaned. And it must indeed be a frightening thing for a superstitious Sicilian, not only to see his unfailing stab penetrate without any effect into the body of the afflicted, but also to hear a hiss, and see with one's own eyes how the fat man opposed it, then turned him into a slender, well-built gentleman. Lister understood the reason for the escaping of the air from the damaged rubber casing, and though laughter was much closer to him, he managed to control himself and exclaimed with a menacing look. "Do you not see, fellow, that the daggers of the enemies do not penetrate my breast?" The Italian, making a cross, remained on his knees and bowed his head in reverence. "Yes, Signore, Giannattino was blind, but now his eyes are open." Lord Lister listened attentively. That seemed like a lesson learned. But not yet sure, and suspecting some ruse, he produced one of his revolvers, which he aimed at the head of the Italian. "You must die, fellow. Now it's my turn." Without a moment's hesitation, the Italian replied. "Take my life, Signore, if thou wilt, or command me." Lord Lister listened in astonishment. He had a hunch of something he dared not believe. "And if I accept your services," he asked, "can I trust you?" The Italian, still kneeling, with a submissive movement, placed his right hand on his heart and replied, as if reciting a memorized spell. "Giannattino faithfully obeys your orders, Signore, or you may let the retribution run its course." "Well then," said Lister thoughtfully, "I take your services, Giannattino." He took a gold piece from his waistcoat pocket and tossed it to him. The Sicilian caught it cleverly. "You are now alone in my service, Giannattino," continued Lister, "and it will do you no harm if you are faithful to me. I have a great work to do, and need the help of faithful men. Take the test, Signor Capo. It is wonderful to serve the great man. Put your dagger away, Giannattino, and listen to me. Do not tell anyone anything I command you and what you will do." The Italian bowed deeply and put his hand over his mouth. "My first order is this: board the yacht Mafia, berthed in the Porto Grande, belonging to the American shore, whose servant you shall henceforth be." He handed him a business card. "Give this to the captain. I will be there myself in a short time. Then we will speak further." "And whither is our journey, Signore Capo?" "Strict secret. To Messina." The Italian paled. "To Messina?" he exclaimed, startled. "What shall I say to Capo Cesare, whose order I have not carried out? Can you not exempt me from that speed, Signore?" Lister's eyes sparkled. His suspicion turned out to be correct and he decided to play his trump at the risk of betraying himself. "Shame on you, Giannattino, what man is afraid? I have been sent by a higher power to wipe out all the iniquities and crimes that abound in Messina. Heavy complaints are raised against Cesare. He is accused of greed and arbitrary murder, of a shameful abuse of his power. I am sent to save your honor. Do you doubt my power, the success of our efforts?" "Tutto all'onore della Mafia," whispered Giannattino respectfully, bowing his head. "But it's a tough fight. Capo Cesare is mighty and great. Thou, however, who can change thy body, and who are not wounded by the daggers of enemies, thou art still greater. Highly recommend Giannattino and his dagger." He folded his hands over his chest in submission. "If we are victorious and you have been faithful to me, Giannattino, in honor of the company, your fortune will be made, I solemnly promise you." "Ebbene Signore. I am yours in death and life." "All right then," said Lister in a commanding tone, to the Mafia. "We will meet there later." The Sicilian bowed deeply and hurried to the harbor. Lord Lister looked after him thoughtfully. Then he prepared to deliver his letter to the Marquis. The die was now cast. The gentlemen were still smoking by their glasses when Lister, of his exceedingly slender frame, entered and handed the Marquis the much-desired letter. "But Mr. Shaw," said Charlie, laughing, "where has your size gone?" "So does the healthy climate here, my dear boy," Lister replied gravely. "It pleases me, my dear Marquis, that the dagger destined for you has only punched an opening in my gummy belly. Do you have the adhesive with you, Charlie?" "Of course, as a good cyclist," replied Charlie cheerfully. "But not here, she's in my cabin on the yacht." "Well, my gummy belly can be repaired there." Finori, meanwhile, had opened the letter and let out a cry of terror. "What is it, friend cook?" Lister asked, as always in his part. "Oh, read for yourself," replied the Marquis. "It is a plea for help from Messina." The writing contained only a few words. These were written down in haste with a graceful lady's hand. "Luigi, come at once. We are all threatened by misfortune. If you love me, hurry. But change your appearance. Meet me at the Gardens of Pace on the way to the Madonna della Grotta. Marietta. That is very urgent, Marquis. Can you trust the author? As myself, dear friend. Countess Marietta di Torresani is my bride. Then I don't doubt her good faith. Yet I do not wish that you should immediately go to Messina on account of this letter, for I infer from the stealing of the letter and the stab that was intended for you that your life is threatened and that your relationship with Countess Marietta. Do you perhaps know your enemies and how far their power extends? Not in the least. I don't even understand how my father and I can have enemies. Then I'll explain it to you. I managed to find out. The enemy persecuting you and your family is, Lister whispered in his ear, the Mafia. The Marquis fell pale and trembling in his chair. Speechless, he looked at Lister and stammered with difficulty, the Mafia? The Mafia? Courage, Marquis. As once your forefathers fought as heroes against the French and Saracens, and achieved the highest fame, so too will we take up the fight against the treacherous plague of your glorious homeland. It is a desperate case, like a battle against the plague. Leave me to my fate, generous friend. If you are right, then I am lost, like my father. Why shall I drag you to destruction with me? Nonsense, Finori. Don't be discouraged. I already had a small victory. And in a whisper he told the details of his adventure. Chance had come to his rescue. He had used the agreed-upon word to a fellow Mafia member. The man thought him one of the chief leaders of the secret society and was now in his service. With the help of the Italian he would succeed in revealing the secrets of the dangerous league, and restore the happiness of the Finori family, but to clear up the old Marquis's disappearance and, if possible, to recover the fortune stolen from them. Finori shook his head sadly. You dare impossible things. Thou knowest not the power of the Mafia, to which even judges and magistrates bow their heads. Secretly and without pity she moves toward her goal, and whoever is her enemy is lost. Best, replied Lister, let me have my way. I don't need your help at all at the moment. One might recognize you. I'm going ahead to explore the terrain. You stay here with Charlie until I send a telegram. You sketch and draw as if everything here was new to you and Charlie takes snapshots like a real amateur photographer. I will send my telegram here to the address of Mr. Shaw Jr. So remember to ask each time if it has already arrived or to provide an address if it needs to be sent back. I will send the meteor back immediately after my arrival at Messina, so that it remains at your disposal here. And now adieu and have the best of fun in delightful Naples. But wait, Marquis. I would like to give my regards to your Countess and learn more about her, so that I may make up my plan. If you don't want it any other way, dear friend. I see you don't let that stop you. The Church of Madonna of the Grotto is in the fishing village of Pace, at a distance of 3 miles from Messina, on the beautiful road to Cape Peloro and the lighthouse. The friends were up. Lister shook hands to say goodbye. Arrivederci. Chapter 5. Messina. Soon the grey yacht, which broke like a proud swan through the waves of the sea, had reached the headland of Cape Peloro with its lofty lighthouse. The Lipari Islands rose clearly to the left, and along the picturesque coast of Calabria, from where dog barks and cock crows could be heard clearly, as the meteor steamed further into the Strait of Messina, which was only 3.5 kilometers wide, the white houses of Scilla, Kenatello and Villa San Giovanni increasingly visible. On the Sicilian coast appeared the fishing village of Pace, the place intended as a meeting place by the Countess, the Marquis's bride. The round dome of the Madonna della Grotta church, a former Artemis temple, towered over the houses. The nearer the yacht came to Messina, the more beautiful gardens the eye saw, gardens in which lemons, oranges, olives, and grapes grew in abundance. And already the beautiful city of Messina became visible, so picturesquely situated on the pale green sea, with a forest of masts in the semicircular harbour running from east to north. The yacht now took its course to the southwest again, along the wonderful harbour street, Corso Vittorio Emanuele, where the meteor dropped its anchor opposite the town hall, which was partly built in Dorian style. As it was now afternoon, Lord Lister decided not to begin his proper research work until the next day. Since he was in the vicinity of the town hall, however, he immediately went to the Sindaco, while the men of the meteor carried the luggage to the best hotel in Messina, the German Hotel Vittoria, on Via Garibaldi, a long street that runs parallel to Corso Vittorio Emanuele. The Sindaco received the world-famous American Croesus, Mr. Shaw, most gracious in his private quarters, and delighted to welcome him within the walls of ancient Messina. He put himself completely at the disposal of the distinguished stranger, but about the death or disappearance of the head of the Count's Finori family he knew nothing more than what Lister already knew. The Count had been killed on a sailing trip to Catania, but his body had not been found to date. The Lord took leave. He had preferred not to use the gummy belly, which had not yet recovered, and had only imitated the appearance of the famous American milliardaire with the aid of wig, beard, and makeup. Thus his stature had remained slender, and anyone who saw him at a distance could easily mistake his age, especially since he occasionally forgot to keep up fully in his role as an elderly gentleman as to the swiftness and resilience of his movements. In short, anyone who did not look well would mistake him, if not for Lord Lister himself, for the young Count Finori, the two being remarkably similar. Rather unsatisfied, the young lord was just about to enter the beautiful piazza from the vestibule of the town hall, to look for the Hotel Vittoria in Via Garibaldi. Suddenly he felt a hand rest on his shoulder, and a little fox-faced man with sharp, but calm and honest eyes stood before him, with his finger pressed to his mouth. "What do you wish, signore?" Lister asked, rather curtly. "Not here. You live in the Hotel Vittoria?" "Do you know that?" The little man bowed, smiling. "Wait for me there, if you please. I follow you." At those words he handed Lister his calling card, and he was quickly gone between the columns of the town hall. "Devilish!" cried the lord, "that is wonderful." He read on the card. "Carlo Sarpic. Detectivo. Serrazio Civico Messina." No sooner had the young lord sat down in his fine hotel room and lit a cigarette, when Giannettino, who had meanwhile been promoted to valet, addressed a visitor, whispering, "Watch out, signore, police." Already the little man with the pointed face entered silently and smiling. When he had closed the door behind him, he walked over to Lister with outstretched hands and a happy smile. "Be 1,000 times welcome, Signor Marquis, to your hometown, where you are eagerly awaited." "You are mistaken, Signor Sarpi. I am not the Marquis Finori whom you probably mean. I'm Shaw, a well-known name, from Chicago, and just arrived here on my yacht from New York." The little man twisted his face into a friendly grin, which made him resemble a laughing bird, and replied, "That's good for you, Marquis Luigi. Your disguise is a great success. By the way, you are quite right. But you need not play hide-and-seek with me, an old friend who has known you from childhood." "Thank you for the compliment, Signor Sarpi. But you are really mistaken. Marquis Finori, whom I met in London, is so strikingly like me that we were thought to be brothers. But if you notice my voice, you should notice the difference." "Yes, that is true." The detective agreed hesitantly. "Your voice is deeper and fuller. Where was my ears?" But then he wanted to get up, but Lister beat him to it. "No, Signor Sarpi, stay. You come when called. I would like to direct some questions to you. I am here as Luigi's friend, and would like to clear up the secret of his father's death before he himself appears on the scene." "A dangerous undertaking, Mr. Shaw." "I know that," Lister replied calmly. "That's exactly what excites me. Because I can confidently confide in you that it is the work of the Mafia." The little man sprang to his feet and gazed at the young lord with reverent admiration. "Do you know that this word may cost you your life?" "Naturally. For I, as the Marquis's representative, narrowly escaped their assassinations twice." "How? To the Mafia?" "Yes. Or maybe I had to fall as the chief's personal victim as well. Besides, I know the capo." "His name, Mr. Shaw? Do you know the name of the present chief of the Mafia, the name of the capo, who is so strictly kept secret? You come to this island from another continent, and can you give that name to us who have searched in vain for years?" "Now, to tell you the truth, I come straight from London to act in the interest of my friend Finori. In London I nearly lost my life at the fortune-teller of Messina." He told his adventure in short words. Sarpi grabbed his hand and shook it. "Call me the name, call me the name." "I only know the first name. He is the son of a fortune-teller, his name is Cesare." "Oh my goodness!" the detective suddenly exclaimed. "It shines a light on me. Awful. Now things are clear to me. Good God! How grateful I am to you. You are on the right track. However, I have to stay behind the scenes, because I'm being watched everywhere. I will, however, prepare everything to be able to help you at the right moment. Let me know in time. If it erupts, I will be there. Excellent. I also prefer to act alone and independently. The detective got up. And what do you intend to do first? I ask this only to assist you in danger. Oh, there's no danger involved. Full of enthusiasm for antiquities and artifacts, I am going to visit the Palace of the Finoris, which must be a real museum. Then I go to La Pace, to drop off a note there. Furthermore, and that is the main thing, I think I will join the secret society myself, in order to investigate everything closely. I strongly advise against such overconfidence, Mr. Shaw. The coolness with which you tell me this compels me to admiration, but you, like many, will pay the staring with death. Lister shrugged. I must know what happened to the old Marquis, and where the legacy of my friend Luigi has gone. And now, let us work separately, but succeed together. Above all, we must keep each other informed of momentous events. Do you want that? The little man looked at Lord Lister with his large, calm eyes and reached out his hand. They both knew that they had not yet communicated everything to each other, because each of them liked to have the lion's share of the work, but they also understood that they could trust each other completely. Chapter 6. Two Mysterious Speakers. The next morning Lord Lister had surveyed the exterior of the Finori Palace on the beautiful quay, which is perhaps unparalleled in the world. Here, in a semicircle, are the Renaissance-style palaces, each one larger than the other, built by the sea. But, as a result of the terrible earthquake of 1783, they contain no more than 2 stories. The roof is located on the heavy columns and above the second floor of the originally much taller buildings. As a result, this long street resembles in part an astonishingly large palace, separated into several sections by Ionic columns and pillars. The middle section is occupied by the town hall, a stupendously grand building, after which the street is called the Palazzita Palace Street. Here, on the north side of the street, lay the old Finori Palace, the foundations of which came from the time of the Normans. However, while the other palazzi still had 2 floors, this palace had suffered even more from the earthquakes, and its owner at the time was content with the lower floor, on which he immediately had the roof installed. Also, to protect against further earthquakes, he had the walls reinforced with very heavy iron bars. It was also said that even the strongest earthquakes hitherto had not caused the least damage to the palace. But Lord Lister had no intention of spending his whole morning inspecting the art treasures and antiquities contained in the palace. It was unpleasant for him to be more or less protected by Signore Sarpi and his people, to think that his doings would be controlled. He knew from Finori that between 9 and 10 o'clock Marietta would come down from her father's higher mansion to hear Mass or pray in the ancient temple of Artemis, the present Madonna della Grotta church. Lister, who had left Giannattino, his new servant, at home, after a cursory survey of the palace and its environs, turned northeasterly toward the beach in search of Pace a few miles away. Whoever had followed Lister's way would most certainly have noticed that another man, carefully concealing himself, was following after him. It was Giannattino, who had already become very attached to Lister. He couldn't stand it in the hotel. He feared for the life of his new master, who moved along the lonely country road with his glorious view of the sea, the coast of Calabria and of beautiful Messina, which stretches like a white arc. The blue-green sea lay against the mountains. Behind him came again, equally cautious and concealed, a little fox-faced man, whom Lister's dangerous plan alarmed, and who did not trust the servant who followed his master. But in this case he did the good Giannattino a great injustice, for he was concerned only for the safety of his new patron. Lister had soon reached the path leading from the strait to the pretty round, domed and colonnaded church. He disappeared into the church, but soon came out again, having seen that there was no lady inside. Lister leaned against one of the columns and looked, enchanted by so much beauty, at the glorious panorama below. He was so absorbed in the unforgettable sight of the sea and the beautiful hued hills of the Calabrian coast, that he did not hear the light steps of a graceful foot. Suddenly, however, he awoke from his dream, for a clear-sounding voice exclaimed gleefully, "Oh, there's my Luigi! How wonderful that you have come, Luigi!" She took Lister's right hand with both of her hands, and as she looked up at him, her large black eyes, which gleamed in the soft flushed, finely cut face, two great tears shone from her long, dark lashes. "Oh, Signora," replied the supposed Finori, "unfortunately, it is not my friend Finori in person yet. But I have come to give you his warmest greetings and to hand you a note from your bridegroom." When the beautiful girl heard the strange voice, she shyly let go of Lister's hand and took a few steps back in disappointment. "Forgiveness, signor. But I certainly expected my fiancé. And you look so much like Luigi. I didn't think otherwise, unless it was you. Now I see the difference, and your voice immediately made me realize my error. But are you from him? Is he healthy and prosperous, and is he over his great sorrow? Here is the note, Countess, which he gave me. That will inform you of everything better than I can." The girl eagerly accepted the letter, and soon she had read its contents. "Oh, Signor Shaw, how can I thank you? Twice you saved his life, and you want to keep watching over him and working for him." Again she took his hand, which she pressed warmly and cordially. "He needs friends so much. Terrible enemies secretly threaten him, and, like his father, they want to kill him only for their own benefit. It's incomprehensible. And now also this last terrible thing. My father is old and we are not as rich as our ancestors were. Now a malicious one has told him that the millions of the old Marquis, Luigi's inheritance, are gone. And that is why he is as strong against our marriage now as he was before it. A rich young man, who, God knows how, got a giant inheritance from America, has asked for my hand. He has told my old father all kinds of things about the rebuilding of our castle, the recovery of the lands, and the renewed splendor of our name. My father promised him my hand. And Luigi's gone and I'm so all alone. Ah, if only he would come back and save me from becoming the wife of Cesare, whom I despise." Lister looked intently at the beautiful girl who stood before him in the picturesque dress of the Sicilian peasant women. Her dress, however, was of finer material and in finer shades than that of the common peasant girls. Beneath the black lace, laced with a silver cord, the virginal bosom arched, and her white hands were folded, as if imploring. "He will come soon, Countess. Count on that. We will watch over him and expose and neutralize his shameful enemies. But did you not call the name Cesare? Has a certain Cesare asked for your hand? What kind of a man is that? Is he the same person who informed your father that Luigi's inheritance is gone?" "I suspect so," Marietta replied thoughtfully. "I know he hates Luigi, though the girl blushed behind her ears, though he's so close to him. Do you believe that this Cesare would take your betrothed's life?" "Ah no, no, Signor Shaw. How could that be possible? Could Cain kill his brother again? I cannot believe in such wickedness, especially since I know what great benefits he and his mother have always received from the old Marquis. And that Cesare now has a lot of money, suddenly a lot of money, Countess, when he used to have nothing. What a strange coincidence. And did he hate the old Marquis?" "I can't think. That would be the greatest sin. No, no, that's not possible. Cesare Giannozzi may be jealous and envious of Luigi, because he is ostracized, disfellowshipped as an illegitimate of the ancient and famous Finoris, but a murderer, no, Signor Shaw, that would be too terrible." "Good Countess, I hope you are right," replied Lister. "In any case I am very grateful to you for your interesting statements. I shall not fail to inform the Marquis of everything as soon as he comes, or when I meet him. Oh, I must thank you, Signor Shaw, for coming here for me. And I am reassured, now that I know that he is well and that you are watching over him. It's a real comfort to me. Above is my father's modest villa. I must go home now, it is more than time." The young Countess, with an enchanting, melancholy smile, which made her classical features even more charming, reached out to him, her graceful white hand. Lord Lister pressed it reverently to his lips and departed with a polite greeting. The Countess also bowed her head with a friendly greeting. Then she walked up past the green orange trees, where her father's humble villa lay. A grinding noise made Lister turn. Down the road a motor car approached rapidly, which was quickly hidden from view by a bend in the road. The young man walked thoughtfully through the covered portico, to see also the interior of the peculiar, domed church. In the beautiful building he walked back and forth with slow steps. But he saw nothing of the columns and vaults, nor of the many interesting sculptures and paintings of the ancient Sicilian masters. His thoughts were involuntarily occupied with the surprising information he had learned from the beautiful girl. And gradually it became clear to him what secrets surrounded the Finori family. He now understood the relationships and motives, and he also now knew who the person was who had committed all these crimes. The Countess, meanwhile, too, lost in thought, had walked up through the green gardens. Suddenly, from the shade of a grove of trees, a well-dressed young man with a sports cap on his curly black hair came up to her, so that she recoiled in terror. "You must have a bad conscience, Countess," he said. "Who have you been talking to so long? I want to know, do you can hear, Countess Marietta? What hast thou to frighten me, Signor Giannozzi? What kind of a way is that of jumping out from behind the trees like that? That's not an answer, Marietta, do you hear me? Answer me, who was it, who made the most chaste of all damsels kiss her hand so gallantly? What language is that to a lady, Signor Giannozzi? I refuse to answer such questions. I hereby repeat to you what I already told you in the presence of my father, that your proposal is not only insolent, but also evil. You know very well that I am betrothed, though in silence, to Marquis Luigi Finori. Only from him do I tolerate such questions." "Yes, yes, I know, my dove, you said that when your father gave me his permission. I have engraved your insulting words on my heart forever. But you'll be mine anyway. In vain will you wait for your proud bridegroom. Before I give you up, he too will." The hot-blooded Sicilian bit his lips and clenched his fist. What had he almost gotten carried away with? But the girl had understood from his fierce look and from his revealing hand movement what he had managed to keep quiet in time. She raised her large, dark eyes at him with an expression of horror, and exclaimed, "Swear to me, Cesare, that you are not to blame for the death of the old Marquis." "I swear, Marietta." "Swear that you are not complicit in his disappearance. Swear to me by the Madonna of the Grotto, my patron saint." Cesare put both hands on his chest and then extended them defensively. "What outrageous infamy do you suspect me of, Marietta, things of which I am innocent?" "Are you innocent? Really? Well, then swear to me." Cesare looked at her sharply. He started to get suspicious. How would the hated man, whom he imagined forever in the Thames, be saved? Had she been informed of this? Had it perhaps been he himself who just spoke to her? And suddenly he thought he knew for sure, when he remembered the figure of the man whose conversation with the Countess he had been spying. "Well, girl, you won't tell me who you spoke to?" "But I guess so. And though he escaped my vengeance, your dear Luigi, rejoice not too fast. In vain do you wait for your proud bridegroom. He too will fall. But you will be mine. No struggle will help you, for I, Cesare Giannozzi, the bastard of the Finoris, I am the chief of the Sicilian Mafia." Cesare put a silver whistle to his mouth, and three men in floppy hats and clad in black sprang out of the bushes and grabbed the Countess at a beckon from the capo. A screaming cry for help came from the startled girl's mouth, then Cesare Giannozzi gagged her in the shapely mouth, and his helpers bound her arms and legs with ropes. An unconsciousness seized her, so that she was fortunately not aware of the terrible nature of the situation. "To the car, as soon as possible," whispered Cesare hoarsely, and the four men hastened with their enticing burdens to the Church of the Madonna to reach the car that was waiting on the road. At this moment came a thunderous voice, "Halt, you scoundrels!" in the ears. Lister had clearly heard the whistling and the cry for help, and had rushed out of the church to see what was happening. Holding one of his small revolvers in each hand, he barred the bandits' way from the church to the highway where the driver, a fourth member of the Mafia, stood by the railcar. "Stop!" It sounded also to Lister's right, and an equally commanding halt. "On the left side." "Cursed!" cried the capo angrily, firing his revolver at Lord Lister. "Run and leave the girl behind," he then cried in a commanding tone, and the men were only too eager to obey. But there burst one of Lord Lister's revolvers, and the capo, who had been struck in the right arm, dropped his weapon. However, he stooped and took the revolver in his left hand. But he missed with this hand, though the bullet flew right past Lister's head. Two shots rang out from the bushes to the right and left, and one of the men fell beside the unconscious Marietta, crying, "Jesus Mary!" Like chamois, The others clambered down the slope to the road, following their wounded chief. Lister sent them a few more rounds, but they were too far gone, and as he bent over the unconscious countess, he heard the car speeding away. At this moment a little fox-faced man emerged from the bushes and cried out enthusiastically. "Bravo, excellent! Signor Shaw. You have outdone yourself. All regards." Lister didn't look up too friendly. "Thank you, Signore Sarpi, for your benevolent help, but you hit too well this time." "Yes, that's true. The guy can't give us any more information. But thou hast branded the captain well. That is enough. But where is the third in our league?" "What, you, Giannatino?" asked Lister, amazed at the loyalty of the young man, who had just emerged from the undergrowth, reverently and modestly. "Yes, Signore. I couldn't stay home now that I knew you were in danger. But Signore can only cope with Capo and the whole Mafia. This is the first time Capo has been hurt." The detective pricked up his ears. "What are you saying, man? That wounded one, Signore Cesare Ginozzi, the Capo, the chief, dash? Didn't I call you by name yesterday, Signor Sarpi? You see that I was right. But now, Giannatino, drag the corpse into the bushes, lest the Countess see it immediately when she regains consciousness." Sarpi also offered help. Both men carried the dead into the undergrowth. Lister, however, drew water from the fountain near the church in his hat and moistened the pale girl's face. A long sigh was heard, and Countess Marietta opened her large, dark eyes in fear. "Cesare the chief. Cesare, the Capo. Oh, save Luigi. The Capo has sworn death on him." Chapter 7. The Catacombs of Messina. It had taken some effort and 2 white gold pieces to gain entry to the Finori Palace. At last, however, they had succeeded in convincing the grizzled caretaker of the innocent love of antiquities of the fat American gentleman, his valet and Italian guide. Lord Lister had today, on the occasion of the meeting with the members of the Mafia and the son of the risk teller, chosen a new disguise with the aid of the regenerated rubber belly. Accompanied by Giannatino in his usual garb, they finally found themselves in the great hall of the distinguished house, which formed an interesting gallery of the most famous painters of Messina, from Antonello and Caldara de Caravaggio to Menati and Silla. Mr. Shaw expressed his delight in a loud voice, making constant notes. But already after half an hour the caretaker, whose money was burning in his pocket, offered some urgent messages and left the art-loving visitors alone. Realizing that the guard would not return so soon, Lister left the works of art to himself, using his ingeniously arranged key, to the great surprise of Giannatino, to walk from room to room to discover any trace of the mysterious disappearance of the old Marquis. But it seemed as if this effort would be in vain. Not the slightest little thing was reminiscent of some crime, neither in the old-fashioned rooms with their furniture of great art value, nor in the dining room, which had been kept in true Renaissance style, nor the small reception room with its wallpaper of soft green silk, white doors and rococo furniture. Giannatino followed the American into a cozy library, where the filled bookcases on either side of the arched windows and the 3 writing desks proved that the gentleman of the House of Finori had shown more than usual interest in scientific studies. While Lister, still standing in the door of the drawing-room from which he had just come, admired the splendid Renaissance chimney with the charming seats in front of it, the round table and Renaissance-style oak bookcase, as he gazed down the rows of books and the windows. Let go, Giannatino had suddenly turned pale. Trembling, he had folded his hands and looked around the room, standing motionless. Lister looked surprised at the former Mafia member's strange demeanor. "What is it, Giannatino?" he asked with interest. "Do you see ghosts?" A deep sigh came from the Sicilian's chest. "Yes, signore," he replied gravely. "This is the room I saw dreaming and waking, which I could never forget since the great old man cursed us." Lister's eyes glittered. This was a trail, and so close. He had wanted to smile, but with serious countenance he asked. "By order of the Mafia, of the Capo?" "Yes, signore," whispered the Sicilian. "I say no evil of the Mafia, which also avenges the crimes of those in high places. But I do not trust the Capo, the chief Cesare. He ordered this act. And to this day I tremble at the thought of the old man's look and voice when, pointing to the Capo, he uttered a terrible curse. Afterwards, however, without saying a word, He let himself be bound hands and feet, blindfolded, and the capo itself forced a gag in his mouth. Ever since that hour, I've cursed myself for joining the Mafia. From that moment I did what Capo Cesare commanded me with disgust, for I have no rest since I had to bring that venerable old man to ruin. What you say there, Giannattino, does you credit, said Lord Lister in a solemn tone. Well, I will confide to you today that I have been sent to investigate the crime of which Capo Cesare is accused. If you will help me, if you stand by my side to track down that old gentleman, dead or alive, I promise you that you will no longer belong to the Mafia, but that, freed from all cares, you will be an esteemed man of small fortune, will live where you want most. Oh, Signore, if only that were possible. That would be heaven on earth for Giannattino. A humble conception of heavenly happiness, Lister replied with a smile. Now go on, Giannattino. What happened to the prisoner? Where have you taken him? The Sicilian beckoned to Lister and walked over to the oak cupboard. Take your magic key, my lord, which opens all doors, and unlock it. He looked around. On the mantelpiece stood a pair of two-armed Byzantine candlesticks with large candles. He took them off and gave Lord Lister one. I have something better, which does not go out in the draught, nor leave traces of dripping fat. He took out his electric lantern and pointed it to Giannattino. But you take the candles, it won't hurt. The doors of the huge closet, which stood slanted in one corner, sprang open and, as Lister shone his light into them, he saw the beginning of a massive stone staircase. Giannattino had lit one of the candles and, after Lister had closed the cupboard doors behind them, the men set out determinedly down the dark stone staircase, which seemed to lead to the interior of the earth. A cool gust of wind came toward them and Giannattino had to protect his flickering candle by hand, but Lister's electric lantern lit up the downward staircase with daylight. They inhaled a dull, putrid air as they passed along a long, narrow corridor, which they had to pass one after the other. From there they reached a great room, where there were wide niches in the walls, in which rotten coffins and numerous skeletons, skulls, and bones became visible in the glow of the electric light. Lord Lister stopped in astonishment. But these are the old catacombs, he exclaimed. Certainly, Signore. We are here in the remnant of the earthquake-destroyed catacombs more than 100 years ago. Now everything becomes clear to me, cried Lister in a low voice. Here is the meeting place of the Mafia of Messina. You guessed it, sir, as you guess everything. Well, in the afternoon there is still no danger to be feared. But what should we do if we are taken by surprise or if we find one of the members? Lister nodded and thought for a moment. Listen to my plan. If we meet anyone, identify yourself as a member of the Union. Tell him, whoever he is, that we have come here because you wish to introduce me, Umberto Greeley from Venice, as a new member of the society. I have been in Venice for a long time, I can speak the dialect quite well and I will get out of it. If we don't meet anyone, so much the better. Only use force in the most extreme emergency. Giannattino thought it was excellent. The plan met with his full approval. The road now went down again. They were long corridors, without light, almost impassable, which had once served to store the corpses and in which niches had been carved into the rock-hard rocks on either side. The upper niches were cut further into the rock than the lower ones, so that the vaults of the catacombs widened upwards. We're on the spot, Signore, said Giannattino, when they had reached a smaller hall, which lay still deeper. Hither hast thou brought the old gentleman? Yes, Signore, only this far. This is the meeting room of the Mafia and of the Council of 11, the chiefs of the League, which no one knows. Whether they took him further away, what happened to him, whether he was sentenced here, I don't know. We were all sent back here by a different route. Lister made a desperate wave of his hand. But that doesn't help us any further, Giannattino. How shall we find the old gentleman then? The Sicilian shrugged his shoulders. They went on through the room, which soon changed in appearance. Lister looked around. The space was much like a church, or a theatre. Anciently, the stone rows of seats, higher and higher, were arranged in a semicircle around the semicircular hall. On a rectangular podium stood a black-covered elongated table with a raised seat in the middle and 5 simple wooden seats next to it on either side. At one end of the table was the 11th chair for one of the dreaded squad, who seemed to hold a special office. Was he the secretary, the treasurer, or perhaps the executioner of the association. With a shiver, Giannettino saw his new master, without any emotion, enter this place of terror and examine everything carefully. Trembling, almost unwillingly, he looked around and rushed to all the entrances to see if anyone was hidden or approaching. Meanwhile, Lister had examined everything closely. But the rough-hewn table didn't hide a single secret. On one of the rocky walls was a black sheet with a gigantic skull, a symbol which here, amid the skeletons and bones of the catacombs, seemed quite superfluous. When the Lord lifted it, he discovered that it was not only for decoration, but for the purpose of covering a large cupboard which had been placed in one of the niches. With a flash Lister understood, this was the secret hiding place of the treasures of the Mafia. With feverish haste he set to work with his incorrigible spanner. Both doors sprang open, and Lister, in spite of his usual self-control, had almost screamed out loud at the overwhelming sight. All the open compartments of the very simple case were, except for a single one, containing only papers, filled with glittering jewels and glittering pieces of gold, while in the larger lower compartments were pockets bearing the numbers 20,000. So each contained 1,000 gold pieces, and Lister counted at least 100 in haste. At his master's suppressed cry, Giannettino had hastened toward him. When he had glanced in the closet, however, he drew back and covered his eyes with his hands. "Good Lord!" he cried, "the treasures of the Mafia!" Lister had regained his presence of mind. "Do you know a hiding place from which we may carry the treasure safely to the old Lord's house? Think quickly, Giannettino, it will be your own interest too." "Lord, do you dare?" "Quick, quick, Giannettino. Don't waste time, it's too precious. Here rest the treasures of the Devil's Association. We must take advantage of the moment." Sicilian thought. "I have found it, sir. Up there, further up. Perhaps you have noticed too, there is the grave of one of the first names of the church, of a bishop, I believe. That's empty. Perhaps because of the valuables stolen and emptied. We can lift the marble lid together. There we must hide the treasure. No one will look for him there, when the lid is on again with the cross on it." They had worked hard for nearly 2 hours and walked up and down the corridors innumerable times to store all the treasures in the deep coffin. But even more precious than all the jewels, and gold were the many papers and securities which Lister, who once again felt like an accomplished master thief Raffles, had found in one of the most hidden compartments. All were in the name of Marquis Finori. In this way Lister, the clever Raffles, had rediscovered the legacy of the young Marquis Luigi, and so his journey to Messina had at least not been in vain. When the two men had put the marble lid with the cross back on the tomb, and took a moment's rest, panting and sweating, the old tomb was worth 10 million lire. "Enough for today, Giannettino. Let's go back now. It is better to collect the treasures in the morning hours." The Sicilian nodded in agreement and they began to climb the stairs again. At this moment a hoarse voice rang out from above, "Halt! Who there? Stand still or I'll shoot." "Put out the light, sir?" Giannettino asked in a whisper. "Needless," replied Lister in the same tone. "People have noticed us and they are coming to us from above. Answer, Giannettino." "Who there?" It sounded for the second time. "One of the brothers," Giannettino replied loudly. "Give the password," came the voice from the dark. Lister had not thought of this and already grabbed one of his revolvers. But the Sicilian replied calmly. "Duke of Ossana." Now a torch was lit above them and several persons descended the stairs. Lister, in order to appear as carefree as possible, had lit a cigarette and bowed like Giannettino as the men, 11 in number, strode past them. The last of the men, all wearing black silk half-masks, seemed to recognize Giannettino. He beckoned him to come closer. "I have come to report as I am back from my journey to Naples, Signore," he said. "Done, Pietri." This was Giannettino's family name. "What were you instructed?" "Unfortunately not, Signore. The letter is still at the post office del Piliero. No one came to pick him up. I stayed for 2 days, but it was in vain," Giannettino lied. "It's all right, Giannettino. It's not your fault. But who do you have there with you? Why do you bring that man here?" "I always serve the Mafia, Signore, and always strive to get it more members. This man is a novice, a friend of mine, the brave Umberto Greeley of Venice, whose dearest wishes to be included in our association." The mask nodded in satisfaction. "Fine, my son. If you can vouch for his honesty and fidelity, then you have made a merit to the Brotherhood. Is the capo already there?" He turned to the others. "Not come yet," replied one of the 10 men, who had meanwhile taken their places on the dais. "Stay here, both of you," shouted the last of the team. "When the capo comes, we will call you to consider the proposal of you and that man." Lister smoked his cigarette mechanically. Now would be the opportune moment to flee, as the passage upwards was clear. At this moment a shriek echoed through the subterranean vault, followed by a roar of rage. The secretary of the team, just about to take the minute book out of the cupboard, had discovered the theft of the treasures. The words were clearly heard: "Revenge. Death to the audacious. The greatest punishment." "Discovered, signore. Discovered too early." The Sicilian whispered, trembling. "Let us flee. The way up seems to be clear. Fast." There was a thunderous voice. "What's going on down there? What are you doing? Answer immediately." "Noble capo." It sounded back. "Something terrible has happened. The worst blow has struck us. Our treasures have been stolen. The thief has not left a single piece of gold." "Accursed!" shouted the capo, gritting his teeth. "That's impossible, that's impossible." He rushed down as quickly as possible, his right arm bandaged, but stopped in horror when he discovered the 2 men motionless. "Who are you? What are you doing here? You seem suspicious to me." "It is I, Signor Capo, Giannettino Pietri, just back from Naples, and this gentleman is a friend of mine and a new member of the Union." Cesare took out his revolver with his left hand. "And are you still looking, fools? Here are the criminals, these are them and no one else. Would that be a new member for our society? Come and stand here before me, the highest judge of the Mafia. Now I understand my mistrust of Pietri. It's a crossed card. Don't let any of them escape. Bring out the revolvers. They must die. Yes, death and damnation to the robbers." The 11 masked ones roared in anger. The barrels of 11 revolvers were pointed at Lister and Giannettino. Chapter 8. In the torture room of the Inquisition. It was about half an hour before this event that in a side corridor of the catacombs, in a closed room connected with the Church of San Francisco de Paula, a rare scene was played. This room was also the former burial vault of one of the most important ecclesiastical authorities from the times of the first Christians in Messina. Where the tomb had formerly been, now stood in the center of the room a rough wooden cot, on which, hand and foot bound, and body tied to the cot, lay an old man with a noble but pale face and a long, snow-white beard. An artfully arranged stone slab, provided with bolts and hooks, separated the chamber, a subterranean prison cell, from the rest of the catacombs and from the rest of the world. In spite of his great pallor, this vigorous Roman head with the fiery dark eyes showed an inflexible will and great determination. The old man had only his right arm free, from which the rope seemed to have just been untied. Before him stood a man, wearing a black silk half-mask under his floppy felt hat, holding a piece of paper and fountain pen in his left hand, while his right arm rested in a black bandage. "Marquis Finori," he exclaimed, "sign this will, which names me heir to the fortune and name of the Finoris, and you will have your freedom back." "No, no, my dear son," replied the handcuffed man with a cutting scorn, "I know all too well the history of the Borgias. On the contrary, if their victims had signed it and believed that they had saved their lives, they would have upheld their death sentence. I'll take care of myself." The masked one stamped furiously on the stone floor. "Then die like this. I have the money, and if I can't act here as the heir of the Finoris, there's plenty of opportunity beyond the ocean to enjoy and be honored like a Croesus. Then live well, good, dear father, who had his own son cast out of his house." "Yes, bastard," answered the prisoner fearlessly, "whom I had thrown into the street as an extortionist and forger. Have I not paid you rich enough? Why have you wasted it? Why have you been reckless with it, you worthless chap?" The masked one trembled with anger, his fist clenched the paper. "You are in my power. Thou shalt die 1,000 dead, not one, you cursed brat. Do you see that clock up there? Do you see the knife hanging there?" He hurried to the wall, on which hung a weight and a chain. With a rattling sound he pulled the weight upwards with his left hand, after which the clockwork could be heard ticking. the knife weighing itself up and down at even intervals. It hung just above the prisoner's chest. The handcuffed old man looked up indifferently. "I understood at once," he said, "when I discovered that knife up there, that this must be some devilish work of my son. Look, look, it's moving and probably getting lower and lower. What a wonderful invention." The masked man, meanwhile, had set the clock, which hung quite high, with a stick. "You are mistaken, dear father. I am clever at mechanics, but I did not invent this death knell, I only repaired it. This beautiful device was invented by the Holy Fathers, the humane members of the Inquisition, to punish the inveterate infidels and cause them to die a triple death. Many others have already lain in the place where you now lie, unbelievers and believers, guilty and innocent, who could not defend themselves, and who often had only the crime on their conscience to be rich, and to have aroused the greed of the Holy Fathers. Perhaps they were less inveterate than you whom I hate. It is now our Lord's year 1908, if I am not mistaken." "Certainly, certainly, Marquis, unnatural father, haughty nobleman. And should you escape this knife, which is inconceivable, the walls above your head will fall, and if you are not crushed by it, the ground will crumble beneath your feet, and you will fall into the subterranean arm of the Torrente di San Francesco di Paolo, which under this bottom takes its way to the sea." "Thanks, thanks," replied the grey prisoner, sneering. "A portion of all this is already more than enough. But you, villain, be cursed. If ever a father's curse has come true, it will surely strike you. Go to hell, cursed one, where you, devil, belong." For all his unscrupulousness, the masked man trembled inwardly. But, to show nothing, he laughed loudly. "Outdated conceptions, dear father. And if perhaps it can comfort you in any way, know that you will soon be united with your beloved Luigi. But then, in spite of your refusal to sign, I shall be your heir. This is my farewell greeting. The saints will protect my beloved son. Go, you inhuman, let me die. But first free me from your hated presence." The villain laughed. "So, father, don't let time fall on you too long. You have 10 minutes to live. Look at the pointer. When it reaches 12, the blade will have fallen so low that it will slowly but surely pierce your heart. That will be the completion of my vengeance. Have fun, old brat. These 10 minutes will break your pride. Adieu." "Stupid. I am in the care of God. But you, unfortunate one, are of the devil forever. Go, don't tease me any longer. A Sicilian nobleman knows how to die." "What? Do you still dare to defy me?" cried the degenerate son, full of anger and disappointment. "That's strong. No God can save you, fool, and no prayer can change your fate." "Who knows?" With a sneer the villain withdrew, and the door slammed shut behind him. Lonely and desolate, unable to move, the old man lay on the wooden cot. When he pressed his ear against the wood on which he lay, deep below him he actually heard the murmur of the waters of the Torrente. But his eyes were irresistibly drawn to the clockwork above him. 8 more minutes. Slowly but surely it went on, and the knife, which was attached to a rod and flickered in the light of a torch left by Cesare, came closer and closer. Each time with a jerk it came closer. 7 minutes. He wanted to close his eyes, but involuntarily they turned back to the clockwork and his ear listened to the ominous ticking. 6 minutes more. The steamer of the Florio Rubaltino Company had just arrived at the Scala di Marmo in Messina. Among the numerous persons expecting their friends or relatives coming from Naples on the quay were also a short man and a slender, elegantly dressed girl, whose face was covered by a veil. "I'm afraid he won't come again, Signore Sarpi," said the young girl to the detective. Their 2 young men approached with swift strides from the jetty, ascending the steps of the wharf with a springy step. One, an artist in appearance, had scarcely seen the waiting when he waved his hand in greeting and rushed over to the slender young lady. "Marietta mia." "Oh, Luigi, Luigi." The girl, despite his disguise, had recognized her betrothed by voice and figure and fell into his arms, laughing and weeping at the same time. The detective, meanwhile, had Charlie, or rather Mr. Robert Bentinck of Chicago, greeted in a lively tone, and informed him that his uncle, that is, Lord Lister, had instructed him, Mr. Robert and the young Marquis here at the wharf. His uncle was himself prevented by weighty matters, probably related to the crime in the Finori family. When the luggage had been forwarded to the Hotel Vittorio and the people sat together in the real Italian restaurant of the Venetian Hotel in the Oaken Eve, the conversation became very lively. Soon, however, the detective arose. "It's time. My people are waiting at the appointed place. If thou abide by thy bold resolutions, gentlemen, it's nothing more or less than a journey into the underworld. Now it's time to raid the criminals." "Oh, take me too. Luigi, can you think that I would now put you in danger alone to be left behind? I know what Signore Sarpi's plan is." "No, no, Countess," exclaimed it, "I beg you, stay here. One cannot know what battle will be fought there. And you do not suspect to what abominable place I shall have to take the lords. Though it went straight to hell, where that dreadful man belongs, I will never leave my Luigi. I should die for fear of him. Look, Signore Sarpi and you Luigi, I am armed, I have courage. Not in vain am I a daughter of the Teresanis." Beautiful Marietta, with shining eyes, produced an elegant revolver and a beautiful little dagger, which made the gentleman smile. "All right, Signora," replied the detective in a friendly tone, "then I'll tell you where we're going. To the subterranean channel of the Torrente, which communicates with the sea, a road known to none but us and the Mafia, and which leads to the remains of the catacombs." "The catacombs?" the girl repeated, shivering with horror. "Wherever Luigi goes, I go too. Though it be death and destruction, with him I would rather perish in the eternal night than have to live in luxury and light without him." "Enviable Marquis," muttered the little man, moved in spite of himself by the young girl's sacrifice. "Come then, gentlemen, to the subterranean road, where the boat with my men awaits us. Up against the Mafia." Chapter 9. Battle during the earthquake. Loud was the ticking of the clock in the subterranean abode, up and down, but falling noticeably. The dagger moved, twinkling in the light of the torch. The pointer was now 5 minutes to 12, and the old Marquis could not avert his eyes from the infernal machine. Despite his courage, he shivered at the thought of what lay ahead. The inevitable approached. Captivated and abandoned by all, deep beneath the earth, doomed to immobility, he saw the steel creep closer, and the flickering blade, drawing nearer, seemed to him the covetous twinkling eye of a beast of prey. Unbeknownst to him, great drops of sweat ran down his forehead, his hair stood on end with terror. Desperately, he clutched his forehead with his right hand. It was only at this moment that he remembered that his criminal son, in his great excitement and hatred, had forgotten to bind again the right hand of his victim, which he had untied for the signature. The pointer gave him 4 more minutes, when the grey Marquis, trembling with his right hand, tried to untie his ropes. Another minute had passed and in his nervous haste the first attempt failed. The ropes on his chest didn't seem to be untying. The Marquis forced himself with superhuman strength into calm and deliberation. At last he succeeded in finding the end of the rope with one free hand and untying the knot. He had only 2 minutes left. With difficulty he threaded the end of the rope through the knots, and when the pointer reached 1 minute before the last digit, the rope that held him to the bunk fell down on either side. The Marquis had been ambushed and bound in his library. The villains hadn't bothered to search the pockets of his velvet house jacket. What did the little things that might be found in it mean to the millions in the safe? And the capo had urged great haste. Thus he was hastily handcuffed and carried through the closet, a road known only to the capo, to the ancient catacombs. It had been a great folly of the Marquis in former years to betray these secrets to his beloved, the beautiful Clea Ginossi, in order to receive her secretly. After their divorce, she had entrusted all this to her son Cesare, but now for quite different purposes. Perhaps it was even the fault of the Marquis that, in possession of these dangerous secrets, he, Cesare, took his place of dominion in the secret society, and thus became a criminal. As all these thoughts raced through his mind at lightning speed, he pulled out his pocket knife. In the twinkling of an eye he also cut the other ropes that bound his left arm, legs, and feet, and quickly sprang from the wooden cot, which his inhuman son had thought to be mortal. The pointer was at 12. Suddenly there was a loud chatter, and close to him the razor-sharp blade plunged with great force into the wood, just where his heart had been a few minutes earlier. "God be praised. He saved me at the last moment," whispered the grey Marquis. Suddenly the burned-out torch that had hitherto illuminated the vault was completely extinguished. An impenetrable darkness surrounded him. He felt in his pocket and found a box of washing matches. When he had lit one of them, he looked up, startled. What kind of air current was that, coming from above and probably extinguishing the torch too? In the flickering light he discovered a fissure above him which seemed to widen. The double ceiling gaped and the two sections seemed to be moving faster and faster. A single glance convinced him that only in the middle, on the cot, was a safe place, if he did not want to be crushed by the falling stones. His wax match was burnt out. He lit a new one. Suddenly, with a thunderous roar, both parts of the ceiling fell. And as if by that fall a new mechanism had been set in motion, now under the Marquis, as once in the London house under Lord Leicester's feet, the floor began to move. Perhaps Cesare had taken this ancient arrangement, devised by ingenious monks, as an example for the room in the house of his mother, the criminal fortune-teller. The old man shivered. He broke into a cold sweat when he felt the floor totter beneath him and seemed to slip away. Suddenly, however, he listened sharply. What was that? Wilder and louder than the creaking man-made machinery, as coming from the depths of the earth, there resounded a rolling, thundering, and roaring, which turned into whistling and howling, creaking and screeching, as if all the devils of hell in the interior had been released from the earth and drew nearer and nearer with their screaming, savage armies. Suddenly everything seemed to have taken on an undulating movement, the walls bent together and urgent sounds were heard through marrow and bone. God save us. That too, whispered the Marquis in horror, an earthquake. The terrible, devastating earthquake had begun. In the subterranean meeting room of the Mafia, the mouths of 12 revolvers were pointed at Lord Leicester and his faithful Giannatino. To protect their capo, the squad had climbed into the seats, guns in hand, waiting only for a further order from their master. Giannatino had turned pale. He knew his former comrades all too well and knew that no pity was to be expected from them. Lord Leicester pondered with feverish suspense how he might avert the impending danger. His twinkling eyes betrayed not the slightest fear as he surveyed the host of his adversaries with a stern gaze. Although there was no weapon in Leicester's hand, he had his 2 small revolvers in the pockets of his coat ready for immediate self-defense. Some of the Sicilians had sunk their revolvers under the magnetic gaze of his eyes. Trembling they cried out to their comrades. He has an angry look, this stranger. Let us flee. With their superstitious fear one began to infect the other. There is perhaps not a single southern Italian who was not mortally afraid of the evil look. Cesare, the capo, had understood these words and understood the effect they would have on the men. Cowards! He foamed. Are you going to let 2 fellows, if both of them over there, overwhelm you with that beer belly and that traitor? Brave men do not know an evil look. Shoot and you will see whether the power of their gaze can withstand our revolvers. Already the sunken weapons were raised again. In the next instant the 2 valiant invaders would probably have been finished, had not another Mafia adherent burst into the conference room, saying, "The police! The police! They come along the waterway in a boat. The exit along the water has been cut off. I am the only one of the guards still alive. Josue and Manfredo were shot dead by the cursed fellows, who shone their electric lights into our eyes to blind us." "A diabolical plot," cried the capo, gritting his teeth. "That is a conspiracy against the Holy Mafia. This must not remain unavoided. No one else is to blame but this stranger, the thief of our treasures. And do you know whom I think I recognized in him, in spite of his changed form? It is the young Marquis Finori who has sworn death on us. Through him, I swear to you, our 2 faithful have fallen in the discharge of their duty. What punishment is due to him, sirs?" "Death, death!" The team shrieked in unison, and again the capo and his comrades raised their revolvers. Leicester had been waiting for this moment. With a half-loud forward, he had flung himself with a single leap, which was only possible for trained English sportsmen, and with his steel muscles, over 10 of the steps of the rock staircase, where he knocked the capo's menacing revolver out of his hand, so that the first shot was crackling sound came into the stone wall of the high vault. Before Cesare understood what was happening, Leicester's right hand gripped the throat of the astonished criminal with an iron grip, who, unable to defend himself, sank to the stone steps. Giannatino, too, had rushed forward, and none of the bandits dared shoot the trio of men on the rock steps, for fear of hitting their capo. "Come here, friends," he panted with great difficulty. "Help your capo, dear brothers." But his voice grew weaker and weaker under Leicester's relentless grasp. The 2 enemies struggled in each other's arms, and knowing that his life was at stake, The bandit did not spare his wounded right arm either. With the courage of despair he defended himself against Lister. He, too, had succeeded in grasping the Englishman by the throat, and in spite of the terrible pain, or perhaps made even more enraged by it, he clung to him as with iron tongs. At the same time he had encircled Lister's left leg with his right, and in doing so forced the young lord, in spite of his wrestling skills, to remain with him on the steps of the stairs, where he tried by various movements to guide the Englishman, who was having trouble with his gummy belly, downstairs in the room where the allies were. But it was impossible for him to free himself from his adversary so quickly. Now, however, this one too had exerted all his strength and energy and with a jerk tore himself from the body of his enemy. Suddenly he seized the capo by the throat and chest. The horrified criminal felt himself being lifted with tremendous force, and almost paralyzed with terror he gazed down into the depths, above which Lister's muscular arm let him float. But the team now fired blindly to aid the capo. To block the way of the two brazen invaders, on the shoulders of two of the strongest Italians, others of the gang had mounted, and they had almost succeeded in reaching the stairs higher than the two wrestlers and guarding the way out. At the same time, those who stood below also pushed more forward. "Watch out, signor!" shouted Giannatino in a warning tone. But it seemed as if the two brave ones would now lose out. Giannatino did succeed in making the first of those who reached the top of the stairs tumble down with a sharp blow, and shake the whole pyramid of criminals, but already another appeared at the top of the stairs. If the members of the Mafia were to use their revolvers mercilessly, the outcome could not be doubtful, despite the darkness. Not for a moment, however, did Giannatino think of leaving his new master and making use of the way up. A gurgling sound came from Cesare's clenched throat by Lister, and it began to turn black before his eyes popped out of their sockets. Lister exerted all his strength, but suddenly he let go of the criminal's neck and involuntarily pushed the capo, who already thought his last moment had come, away from him to listen intently. For these were not human sounds which were now heard, they did not even seem to come from this world. From the deepest depths and fissures of our Mother Earth, a gigantic monster, howling and roaring and destroying all, seemed to approach. Never had Lister, probably no living creature, heard such sounds. Whistling and screaming, with a thundering, cracking roar, it came nearer, growing louder and louder until it had become an intolerable noise, in which all human earthly sounds, be they thousands of cannon shots or the sledgehammer blows of gigantic steam hammers, seemed child's play. And the terrible came ever closer, the sound always got louder. "An earthquake! Save you!" shouted the thugs, and all hurried to the nearest exit. When for a moment the invisible monster in the bowels of the earth fell silent, and only a distant growl was heard, as of a beast of prey stooping to make the leap, the capo cried out in despair. "Help, brothers! Save the capo!" Some of the men continued on their way without listening. The others, however, raised their revolvers once more. With the last courage of despair, however, Cesare suddenly tore himself free, and in a few leaps he had reached the catacombs without Lister having prevented him. There was again the horrible rumble. Had it previously been more of a howling, screaming, and whistling, as if all the devils of hell had been unleashed, now the sounds were even more terrible to the human ear. Grinding, creaking and destroying everything it came closer. And now it suddenly resembled the sudden leap of a giant tiger attacking men in the night. Lister tumbled and clung to the granitic rock wherein the saint's stone tomb lay the millions. The torches went out below, and even in spite of the savage noise of the elements, human cries of terror were heard. For all around the rocks began to wobble. The masonry walls of the vault collapsed like loose sand, and under the cry of the bandits for help the ceiling fell to the ground. Stones and boulders filled the room. The granite side walls, into which graves and stairs had been carved with great difficulty over the centuries, also faltered, but they held out. Close to the stairs, however, where the masonry began, a wide chasm opened up. Into this fell the leader of the Mafia, Cesare Giannozzi, the depraved son of the Marquis, and the earth swallowed him up with all his dreams of riches, greatness, and might. Chapter 10. The Destruction of Messina. Scarcely had the Marquis uttered a short prayer in the old torture chamber of the Inquisition at the beginning of the earthquake, when the vault collapsed with a creaking sound. The ground made undulating movements, a wide chasm was formed, and together with the wooden cot the Marquis Finori disappeared into the depths of the earth. As the fugitive had told the Council of 11, the detective, young Finori and Charlie, assisted by some officers of the secret police, had fought a frantic battle with the guards of the Mafia. The Countess had not even let out a single cry, though she had also been deathly pale and frightened. She had, however, forgotten to use her graceful weapons. Sarpi's men had lit torches as they pushed further into the canal with gentle strokes of oars. Here and there Sarpi stopped to knock the barrel of his revolver against the walls. He could not, however, discover the secret entrance. At this moment the earthquake began to rage with its thunderous roar in subterranean depths. An earthquake? How terrible! They all shouted at the same time, and the little fox-faced man looked at the vaults above their heads with a doubtful look. And behold, they staggered. But thanks to their enormous sturdiness they held up. Great torrential seas, however, came rolling in from the Calabrian coast, hurrying like a giant horse of Neptune. They also poured into this channel of the Torrente and raised the boat close to the vaults. There, with a loud roar, boulders rolled down from above, not far from the boat. A wide, slit-shaped opening opens and suddenly, to the great astonishment of the persons in the boat, a human figure plunges downwards. With a soft cry he disappears into the waves a short distance from the vessel. He would have been finished if the young Marquis had not just shined his electric light over the water so that he had noticed the grey head appearing above the water. He exerted all his strength and did indeed manage to grasp the arm of the struggling drowning man. The old man clung deftly to the edge of the boat, and he was pulled aboard with the help of the detective, while Charlie and the others stood on the other side lest their boat lose its balance. But they were far from being saved. With great difficulty the men made their way back, in constant battle with the raging waves, which lifted them now high, and then flung them low. More than once the brave men thought their end had come. The old man, who had so accidentally been rescued by them, lay exhausted in the boat. At last they had reached the end of the canal again. But even beyond that, the sea was boiling and bubbling. The sky was obscured by smoke, dust and clouds, and the raging sea slammed foaming against the wrecked beach, overflowing the torn quays, and besides the cracked walls of the once beautiful palace street were the rows of houses. The countless white buildings that lined the sloping slopes had disappeared. Of all the 100 churches of Messina, none rose. The San Gregorio in the Badazia, San Francisco, and San Giovanni, university and barracks, hospital and theatre have disappeared. In vain those who sat in the boat searched with intent eyes for the gloriously beautiful city, the Pearl of Sicily, one of the most thriving, largest trading towns in Italy, which they had recently left radiant with splendor and beauty. The wonderful Messina with its 200,000 inhabitants no longer existed. A smoking pile of rubble, a row of mournful ruins of the palaces by the sea, that was all that had made Messina's fate in a moment of destruction. The old man had also raised himself. With a smile full of happiness and melancholy at the same time, father and son had recognized each other. They embraced, while the Countess, weeping, kissed the old man's hands. But it was almost in vain to contend with the Gulf Stream, which drove the boat northward, past the ruins of the northern Strada Vittorio Emanuele. Suddenly Luigi grabbed his father's arm. A general cry of surprise rang out. Even this time, when everything had been destroyed, the low Palace Finori, only one story and propped up by iron bars, had resisted. It was the only house that had remained in its entirety. With great difficulty they managed to land on the destroyed wharf. Scarcely had all gathered in the old Marquis' library to listen to the tale of his fortunes, when dull blows were heard from the cellar. They all rushed down through the closet door. Who describes Charlie's great joy and amazement when there, pale and exhausted and wounded by the fallen stones, but otherwise in good health, he found his friend Lord Lister with his faithful servant Giannattino. With reverent admiration for such heroism, one listened to his tales of the adventures lived and the treasures acquired of the fate-destroyed Mafia. Only now did Luigi and the charming Countess have nothing to fear. Cesare was dead. Shivering, the old Marquis thought of the ghastly hours prepared for him by his degenerate son. In spite of all his courage and willpower, his hair had turned snow-white that night. With torches and electric lights, Detective Sarpi, Lister, Charlie, and Giannattino descended once more to the place of terror. Once, in various packs and bundles, they fetched the treasures from the stone tomb. The remaining 8 million, however, were handed over to the Sindaco for the benefit of the victims. Captain Wheeler, by taking sensible measures, had saved the yacht. Lister has it prepared to bring relief material from England. When they return and the disaster is somewhat overcome, the marriage of Luigi and Marietta will take place, a young happiness, sprouted from the ruins of ruined Messina. The next episode contains the false coin. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really hoped you enjoyed it. There will be more to come. Please subscribe not to miss out on what is next. I will be looking forward to your return. The music is by Madfan from Pixabay. To support this and other artists, go to pixabay.com. Sheila.